Hey guys, DMS here. Today I have for you a review of the ZMF Verite. Now, this particular pair is not a final finish. Now, it is the final sound, but this was a prototyped pair that I got from the guys at ZMF. And actually, after this, I'm going to be comparing it to the new closed-back Verite. But for this video, we're just talking about this one because I never got my hands on it before. And I remember the original revision of the Verite I wasn't a big fan of, and this one I definitely feel differently about, but for a good number of reasons. So first off, this is the lightest of any ZMF headphone I've tried, and you can tell that they've done a bit of weight reduction on it, but this also uses the new magnesium chassis that ZMF has talked about a few times, and this actually does seriously reduce the weight of these headphones quite a bit. Not only that, these do have new pads in them. The pads remind me of the Auteur pads, but they have a layer of foam right here, like in the ZMF Micro Suede pads, which is nice. It does add to the comfort of these quite a bit, but of course is also part of how they tune the sound. So I feel like it should go without saying, it's a ZMF headphone. It's built amazingly. And comfort, because this is lighter, I already thought the Auteur, the Atticus, the Icon were comfortable, but this seriously did change the game for ZMF's lineup, having this lighter chassis. I am definitely a big fan of the build and comfort on this headphone. Big time. I just put it back on my head. I have worn these for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. I've taken them, plugged them up to portable amps, gone around my house, done my dishes, done my laundry, just worn them all day long, and it never seems to get tiring. And if a headphone can do that, generally speaking, it's good for a long listening session. This came with a few cables. They all terminate to mini XLR, just like the rest of the ZMF lineup. A balance cable, a 1/4-inch cable. I don't know exactly which ones come with the headphone, but those are the ones that they hooked me up with these. I also have a Periapt cable hooked up to the closed version, but right now I'm using these on the iCan Pro. I was using them on the Formula S earlier, and the L amp, which is slidden back here just a little bit. Now, I've tried these on a bunch of other amps, but actually, out of everything, I think I prefer these the most on the iCan Pro with the 11 Audio Sagra R2R DAC. But I did try them on a lot of other things, and I think that the closest to that is the JDS Labs EL amp on the Socris 1321 DAC. So, sound. How do these sound? Well, I actually did something different for once. I did not take measurements of this headphone yet. I might before the closed back review, but as of right now, I did not measure this headphone. I'm going strictly off my ears. And generally speaking, I like to just go by my ears until I have my opinions formed, then take measurements, and generally speaking, my measurements will reinforce my opinions. But in this case, I want to go just entirely without measurement. And that's because I really enjoyed this headphone. I couldn't pick out any major flaws in the frequency response that I needed to target. I don't think the frequency response is perfect. I think it took me a minute to get used to it because there are some areas where I feel like it does this a little bit. I don't feel like it's perfectly flat at all. But as far as the overall performance is concerned, I actually think this is a direct upgrade from the Auteur, which was the previous ZMF flagship, which is kind of crazy. The big thing that separates this from the Auteur is this does sound more natural. It's a little bit less aggressive in the mid-range, a little bit more aggressive on the lows and highs. Not necessarily more elevated, but more aggressive sounding. And it has a stupidly fast decay, which, if you don't know what that means, it's a good thing. The notes and songs, the sound, specifically in a track I was just listening to a minute ago, Love is the Future by Hot Chip. There are times in this song, especially in the beginning, where you hear drums, percussion, and instruments with silence right after them. So there's a lot of short articulated sounds that come into dead silence immediately after. And these go from playing a note or playing a hat or a kick to that dead silence so fast, so incredibly fast. that it was really surprising. It sounded like there was noticeably more silence in the song because how fast these headphones could reproduce a sound and then go back to a neutral position. And I think this is partially due to the new driver that they have in these, which is a Beryllium driver. There was a funny note on the ZMF website about this driver in particular, where they said, "Wait a minute, isn't Beryllium dangerous?" And in the Q&A, it said, "No, unless you take the driver out, dismantle it, crush it into a fine powder, and then snort it, in which case it may damage your lungs. Beryllium is pretty much harmless as long as you are not breathing it or ingesting it, so I don't recommend doing that, but if it's sitting in your headphone, you're fine." And beryllium is one of those materials that is very strong, very thin, very light, and therefore this driver, this speaker inside the headphone, can move in a very uniform way without breaking up and without moving like a wave. You want your whole driver to move in a uniform motion, and beryllium is more capable of doing that than your typical plastic dynamic drivers are. And based off the sound of this, I would say more than ZMF's previous biocellulose dynamics. Now, the sound itself, this has great low extension. It sounds a lot like the bass extension of the Alex and some other focals, actually. Though not nearly as metallic in the upper mid-range and lower treble. The way I would describe the sound of this is with a bit of a mid-range focus at times, but for the most part, it's just a very immersive sound. It's not super wide. It seems pretty narrow until you have certain sounds that come out of the mix. For example, the song We by Bon Iver is a great example of two things this headphone does well. For the most part, vocals are kept in pretty close. Guitars are spaced just barely out, but there's a large drum fill on toms that comes in, and when it goes across, it sounds like it's way out in the room. And to me, this reminds me a lot, actually, of the LCD-X in the way that it kind of sounds. I know that sounds weird. The LCD-X is a planar. Many people, though, think that the LCD-X is one of Odyssey's best headphones, and I would agree that I think it is one of Odyssey's better offerings. It reminds me a lot of an LCD-X that resolves better, is a bit more immersive, a bit lighter, and at times can break out of its narrow staging into a larger field. And it seems to do this with something, some instrument, or some reverb, or some piece of every song that I listen to. And I think that that is giving a lot of songs, between that and the fast decay, giving a lot of songs new perspective for me, which is really nice. And when I can find a headphone that in a positive way can show me pieces of songs that I'm unfamiliar with and re-immerse me in songs that I've listened to a million times, I think that is a good headphone. And the ZMF Verite, while I didn't like the original revision, I am definitely a fan of this one, and really kind of wish that I had one. I wish I didn't have to mail this one away, but this one has to go to Zeos next for review, so I might maybe try and get my hands on a pair of these eventually of my own, but we'll see. It depends on what ZMF comes out with next. There are some parts of the treble that can be a little bit dark, some parts that can be, I don't want to say bright, but can push themselves forward at times. It never sounded bright, it never sounded sibilant, but I want to go back to that Bon Iver track, We, which is on the newer album I, I. So if you want to look this up and test it for yourself, the song Bon Iver, We. This is the song I just mentioned with those drums. It also is a song that is very warm and very dark, the way it's mixed. And that song causes a lot of headphones to struggle, just because there's so many things happening in the lows. The bass guitar, keyboard, vocals, it's all shoved into this lower range. It's all got like some sort of like a low pass filter or something on it, or just mixed very, very warm. So a lot of headphones and speakers do struggle with this track, and these just took it like an absolute champ. The separation of the track, separation of all the instruments, was absolutely on point, as it should be, and I was very, very impressed, because a lot of things I've had here, even things that are sometimes more expensive than this, can struggle with that track, and even some speakers that I have sitting up in this room can struggle with that track as well. Imaging was certainly fine. It didn't strike me as a particularly strong point for this headphone, but imaging also didn't strike me as a weak point. Center image is there, it's strong, I can clearly differentiate left, right, and everything in between. It didn't feel like it was a laser beam, and it didn't feel like it was vague either. It was just acceptable imaging. To me, ZMF headphones normally focus on other aspects before performance. To me, a ZMF headphone generally is a headphone made by an artist. The woodworking is incredible, the design is incredible, and they have a sound that captures the soul of music, more so than the intense detail usually, but this headphone in particular seems to bridge that gap. I feel like this is the ZMF headphone so far that seems to perfectly bridge the gap in their lineup between performance and artwork, and I am very, very, very happy to recommend the Verite. So that's all I have for this video. If you want early access to the next review, it's on Patreon. It's only $1 a month to join. You get early access to all my reviews. Plus it helps me keep reviews like this going in the future. But otherwise, if you liked this video, please leave a like down below, comment letting me know what you want to see in the future, and don't forget to stick around and subscribe for more videos like this in the future. Until the next one, guys. Peace.